Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the Citrix Session podcast. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got with me, of course, Bill Sutton. Bill, how's it going?
Going well, Andy. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be.
Yeah, there's no telling. Hopefully people are listening to this all hours of the day and night.
That's correct.
If they are, that means we're getting our point across, getting some value out there. And as a recorded podcast, hopefully that enables people to take in the content, whether they're walking the dog or heading out to a nightclub or heading home from a nightclub. I doubt that last one applies very often, but if it does, then great. Happy to have that be the reality of it.
That's right.
So this week we've got our blog that we're going to review by Kevin Binder. Kevin, we invited Kevin to join us. It was a little last minute, I guess you would say, but Kevin wrote an awesome blog around Citrix Workspace. Tune in for a great workspace experience. I think there's a play on that title there, but the goal of today is to go through this blog and kind of give the listeners some of our insights on what Kevin is talking about here and maybe expand upon it and add our own little twist to it. But maybe at a later date we can get Kevin to join us. Yeah,
that'd be great.
I do want to highlight a couple things. When you sent over this link and said, hey, let's do this one, I looked at it, so that's great. I do want to make sure we accomplish two things, though. Before we even get started, I want to make sure I highlight two things that are kind of big for me. I'm a big stickler on naming conventions and making sure the name gets out there properly before it gets misused and then turned into many, many reuses of the name. So I spent some time with Citrix a couple times recently, developer conference, the Converge conference they had, as well as a partner conference last week. And I'm going to be very clear to set the record straight. The Citrix product going forward should be called the Citrix Workspace with Intelligence. So for a while there, we've been calling it the Intelligent Workspace. I don't know why, but for very good reasons, I'm sure Citrix has decided to call this the Workspace with Intelligence, and there'll be multiple flavors, all from a standard edition all the way up to a premium plus edition.
Interesting. I guess that's a marketing thing, perhaps, but nevertheless, just make sure that we get out of the habit of speaking about it with the old name and or the kind of the name that's been going around, and make sure we talk about it as you said, the Citrix Workspace with Intelligence, which he highlights in this blog article.
He does. Yeah, he definitely does it. He definitely calls it out.
Yeah, probably for good reason.
Yeah. The other reason why I wanted to stop and pause before we get started is because I'm an old school Citrix guy, just like you are, and I think we're gonna take it back to the old school here in a few minutes. But I did want to let the listeners know that I've had several conversations with executives at Citrix, as high up as you can go, and they are committed to continuing to evolve the virtual app and desktop portion of the technology. They are taking a big swing at this workspace concept because that has been the promise of technology for many years, but they are also committed to making virtual app and desktop, WinFrame, MetaFrame, presentation server, XenApp, XenDesktop, continue to evolve that technology. And one of the goals of this podcast for me is to make sure we continue to highlight what they're doing there. And we have some podcasts coming up where we do that.
Yeah, I think as the listener will see as we go through this, that this is not leaving behind that which has been developed in the past. It's an extension and an expansion to accommodate newer use cases, the nature of technology and delivery as it is today. But we're also carrying forward what we've done in the past, because there's still definitely many use cases for the virtual apps and desktops technology going forward.
Yeah, we're not done with Win32 based apps,
no, sir.
Including the desktop anytime soon.
No.
So Kevin starts his blog off by painting a picture, and I love it when people do that because it allows simple-minded, simple-thinking people like myself to kind of get my boat in the right spot and be able to push it in the right direction. I just visualize a little paper boat and little pond in Central Park when I say that, because I think it's really important that you start off heading in the right direction mentally before you try to dissect something. And what Kevin talks about here is he cut the cord, and I did the similar thing about a year ago in our house. We cut the cord on cable, finally got out of paying that big bill. However, we still pay for internet access through various services, cable in my case, Spectrum to be specific. So we have some bandwidth, but we don't have the TV being provided necessarily, and we moved to a service, and in my case, it was we went from Hulu to YouTube TV, back to Hulu, And then I have a couple others like ESPN and a couple others, the ACC network. I live in the South and I'm an NC State guy. But I can relate to what Kevin's talking about here, right? He found a way to cut the cord, but then that created new challenges with many different types of services that he had to figure out how to aggregate together. In my world, that was pretty simple because I have a Samsung TV. I have about 4 Samsung TVs, and they have the Samsung operating system, which starts you off at this plane where you have all the different services that show up. When you hit the home button, that's where it goes. And then from there, I find myself digging into whatever service I need to get into for that moment, whether it's Hulu, Netflix, YouTube, ESPN, ACC network, HBO. It's a good situation to be able to navigate, but it also highlights the fact that navigation is key.
Yeah, I think a couple things there. In my own personal situation compared to you, I'm still kind of, and we'll talk about this in a few minutes. I still kind of have the old school environment. I still have, I guess you'd call it cable TV, but we have talked about on numerous times cutting the cord as well. We have Netflix and Amazon and of course the HBO Go subscription, those sorts of things, but still have the cable. In my case, it's Fios. We have Fire TV, and then we also, of course, have a couple of Samsungs that have the Samsung app, but and an Apple TV floating around. So a lot of things, but a lot, still rooted in the old school with the cable TV subscription. And one of these days, I'll cut the cord, but not quite yet.
Your story might be even more applicable because you've got the old cable TV solution, which to me represents the Win32 scenario of apps. Mm-hmm. And so you've got it worse. I will highlight here, and I'll bring it back to this in a second. But the desktop, the Windows desktop, was kind of created, just like my Samsung desktop, if you will, was kind of created to help solve this challenge and give us all this, ubiquitous, familiar-looking place to start. And a bunch of Citrix users, log into a Windows desktop and then launch Citrix-related sessions, or they log into a Citrix or some other provided desktop and then launch sessions. But I think your challenge of having the old school, ties into that desktop story as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So I guess I should have said this in the very beginning. This is our interpretation of Kevin's blog here, and anything we say here is all our opinion. I probably should have highlighted that in the beginning, but I'm going to tell now the way I tell the story of what the workspace is. Oh, you know what? Before I do that, let me stay with what Kevin had. I've gotten to the point within the last month or so that I don't know if it's Samsung. I think it's actually Amazon and Netflix that I've somehow hit the button that said it's okay to tell me stuff. And when I turn it on and go to my home screen, now they start to tell me what they think I would like based on things I've watched before, without me soliciting them to tell me that, or maybe I opted in somewhere along the way. But my point there is that is an evolution of the workspace, which I described with the Samsung home screen, is now allowing apps to tell me things that I can then click a button and interact with. That is the workspace with intelligence, right?
That is what it is. I mean, I think some would call it artificial intelligence. Some would just call it intelligence. But at the end of the day, it's very similar, if not the same. I have a similar situation here. I've got young kids like you do, and they're supposed to click when they go into Netflix. They're supposed to click the kids profile. Mm-hmm. But invariably, they click my name, and then I come in a couple of days later, and I've got suggestions for various cartoon and teen shows. So it's not perfect, but it definitely is doing what you're telling it to do, even if you don't know it.
It's trying, right? That artificial intelligence, AI, yeah, for sure.
That's right.
Is it AI or is it analytics? Or is there a different term for it?
No, I think it's AI or machine learning.
Machine learning. There you go.
Those things are all over the place. So that's the emerging technologies. The big one there is Tesla, learning about how people drive and how traffic operates and being able to accommodate it. And I think they've had pretty good success there, but there's a lot more work to be done in that field.
Yeah, on that topic real quick, I drove home from Raleigh, North Carolina yesterday, and I had cruise control set most of the way on a 4-lane highway or bigger.
Right.
And we had we had cruise control, but we also had the radar part that was on the front of the car. So it's gotten so much better. The technology's come so far where it knew when I needed to slow down without me having to go back and forth.
Adaptive cruise control. Yeah.
Oh, it was awesome. It was awesome. Now, having said that, I'm getting ready to talk about my wife here in a second. She will not use cruise control now, and thinks having it understand where other cars are around you is not helpful. It actually hurts her. And in other words, mentally, the idea that the car is going to react first, totally is outside of where she wants to be. She would rather have just the old school cruise control, or just, push the pedal, let off the pedal all the way there.
Huh, interesting.
So the question is, do you trust it, right? Is it smart enough? Will it ever be smart enough? The whole Tesla thing trying to drive me around, I just don't know that I trust the roads enough for Tesla to be able to have what it needs.
I don't trust other drivers. I'm with you on the roads, but I'm not sure I trust other drivers, and maybe not even myself in some cases. But I have a real reservation about that. Although I think the cars are really cool and it's really, really good technology.
Yeah. So let me try my way of explaining the workspace evolution. I start actually with the, I'm sitting in front of a desk right now. It's an old school wooden desk. It's a wooden desk in my house, not because of its usefulness. It is still useful, but because it looks good, right? It's in my front room. It's in an office. I'm not in the actual XenTegra office today, so it's just a nice looking wooden desk. And I mentioned my wife a minute ago. On this desk right now, there's flowers and there's pictures of the kids and there's pictures of family members, that kind of stuff. And there's one keyboard, one mouse, one stapler, and a decent sized monitor. At the same time, there are bills that need to be paid within the next couple of days sitting on this desk. And so the desk kind of represents, 1980s, early 90s for me personally. But for my wife today, this is still how she gets stuff done. She still has bills stuck in certain places of the desk that remind her to pay this one first, pay this one second. And that is that 1970s, 80s concept of a desk. And every year before that, many years before that, but that's the way we used to do it, right? We had this one thing with a stack of papers on one side that was important, and then a single document here or there that was more important. But that's where you sat down and started writing out your checks and writing out letters and things you needed to get taken care of.
You don't still have an in and an out box on your desk, do you, Andy?
Well, I think there is. I think it's not, again, this is not my desk. But however, having said that, before I left the office Friday, I did have different things stacked on my desk so that when I came in Monday, I would know what to hit first. But there is a box. There is a box, and I think that's an inbox. And on the wall, there are 3 more boxes, and I think those are for less important but still inbox related activities.
Right. Well, this relates very, very closely to what we're seeing in the digital world now.
Yep. You know what else is awesome about this? So I'm looking right now. There's a bill to Prudential, and it's laying there on top, and it's open, so it must be important and need to be taken care of. And then there's another one to a U.S. bank that's maybe less important. It got put on the desk without being opened. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe some intelligence could help me.
Exactly.
Yep. And so if I fast forward that mentality, right, that concept, and go to, let's say, 1993-ish, maybe 95-ish, we had this concept of the computer, and that screen that you start with on that computer, someone called that the desktop. And that is, in theory, going to replace my wooden plane here that I have, but as my future desktop. And someone had the intuition maybe of calling it the desktop for whatever reason. They call it the desktop. It's really just the start screen. It's really my workspace in the technology world, and that's where we started to start our day from. One great example of that, I'm sure you've met people in your life that they don't save anything to the documents folder. They don't save anything to OneDrive. They save everything to the desktop because worst case scenario, that's their desktop and they can find it.
Yes, absolutely. I think the desktop was, I think probably that term was, I don't want to give attribution where it's not due necessarily, but I think a big part of that was Microsoft with the Windows platform, calling it a desktop. But, pretty much beyond just Microsoft, a lot of the various players in the industry called it a desktop. It kind of was a throwback to what you're just referring to, the physical desktop. Now we have that computer-based desktop, arguably a virtual type of desktop in the computer itself, not virtual in the way we think of it today. But back then, that's kind of what it was.
Well, and I bet if you took someone whose physical desk, and you looked at it and it was a complete mess, but they knew where everything was, I bet that same person is the same person that saves everything to the desktop, and they have an idea where everything is on that computer desktop. But they now had the benefit of search. So if they knew
Correct.
enough, if worst case scenario, they could start searching using the technology to find that document or whatever app or whatever it was they needed, versus just shuffling through papers on their desktop.
Correct. That's right. I'm sure that's what you would say.
So I'm gonna throw this one out here, and most people listening to this podcast are going to understand. If you're newer, you're probably not going to understand. But at some point in all this, Microsoft started seeing where this was an important concept, and they created this thing, which for most of us older guys, people of a certain age, is what I've been told to call it. This thing made us mad, and what it was an infusion of Internet Explorer onto the desktop, so that things, not only those documents would be there, but real-time information from the internet showed up around 1995, 1996, where we had what was called I think it was called the active desktop. You remember that?
I do, absolutely. I can remember when I worked for a software company at the time, and I liked to be able to be notified of immediate news. So I installed this little applet that sat on the desktop. Whenever there was breaking news, it would pop up and tell me. I didn't do it for very long because it was very distracting. It wasn't really integrated very well, but it was part of that quote unquote active desktop once we had internet in the background.
And, I just thought of maybe the most famous example in that, and that was WeatherBug. Remember WeatherBug?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, it wasn't. I guess it was more of a notification. Anyway, it was similar, right? It showed up anywhere on your computer, anytime it needed to, and lots of reasons why we had to get rid of that thing. But my point is, it was tried before, very early on. I was at an event last week, and someone from Citrix mentioned the Chrome version of this desktop thing that showed up about around 2010, and that being the precursor. I was like, oh no, this happened before. This Microsoft tried it. Because they were smart enough to know it was important and necessary. It just, we weren't ready for it.
Exactly.
So if we fast forward to, so let's do this. So if we fast forward a handful of years, we're going to have lots of examples of players trying to accomplish this. And actually, after this, you're going to go back and walk us through how Citrix tried to accomplish it. But if we fast forward to the iOS world and learning that we didn't necessarily need what Microsoft had kind of defined as the desktop, we just needed a starting place. Now we get into the world of what Citrix is trying to take to the next version, and a lot of people are, and that is this non-specific desktop thing that looks similar across the spectrum of devices and operating systems, that includes things we're going to talk about in a minute, like SAS and files and those legacy Win32 apps, even the desktop links or the desktop app, search capabilities, as well as some interactive nature from all these different apps. We're going to talk through that in a little bit, but my whole point in bringing that up is the evolution for me goes from that wooden plane with papers laying on it specifically in certain places to the world of a workspace where it has intelligence, it has analytics, it has security analytics built into it, performance analytics, and in theory, it's going to help us get more done quicker. I don't know if you've done this recently, though, but the idea that we're more productive than we used to be. Every once in a while, I'll stop and go, that's no way. We're so distracted now. But then at the same time, I sit down to pay my bills, things that used to take 3 or 4 hours, and I get done in 5 to 10 minutes. Like, okay, well, maybe I am a little more productive than I used to be.
Yeah, I think it's really about balance, and it's also about how how in front of you these types of things are. And I think one of the arguments Citrix has made for the workspace with intelligence is the concept of context switching, which we know those of us who are the IT guys, we know this from a standpoint of the architecture of the Intel processor. But context switching, of course, applies to humans as well. And they've done studies that say the brain really can't process or perform 2 tasks at one time. And it's interesting. In terms of what you brought up, Andy, I was reading an article last night about the CEO, I think it was of Google, about how he does. This is kind of a little bit off topic, but kind of related. when he does presentations, he tries to reduce the number of bullet points on his presentations. And I'm sure some of our listeners have heard this before, but essentially the point is that the brain they've discovered that when you read text on a PowerPoint slide, you're not listening, or when you're listening, you're not reading. So the brain really can't process those things at the same time, even though many of us have been taught to think that we can. So this concept of context switching, the more we do it, the less productive we are. And by giving us alerts and information in small chunks and in a manner that is not as obtrusive as it has been, perhaps we can get more done without having to do all that context switching. So in other words, what I mean is we get a notification for something, we don't have to jump over to another app. What if we could do it in our own app? Or we could do it within the environment we're working at that moment? Would that help? And I think, that a lot of studies have shown that yes, that can help. Because we don't have to do a full-on shift to another application and a whole other way of thinking. And that can help us be more efficient, even with the interruptions that we may have to encounter. That makes sense.
Yeah, no, it's funny you brought that up. I took my kids on a college tour Saturday, and we walked by the building where I took my public speaking class. And that's one of the things I remember to this day from that class was, say more by saying less, and only put things on your slides that really need to be reminders of things to talk about. Don't try to put all the information on the slides and bullets. If you do, it turns into an eye chart.
It does.
And I think what's interesting about today's world is you can have all that content, but the computer or other technologies can help you sift through it quicker.
Right.
We talked about some of my days back in college, and the idea that we would sit there for 5 minutes, literally, for one page to load on on the internet. My kids thought that was ridiculous, and I was like, "Well, that's how it was. We didn't know any different." Now they have full blown computers in their hand all the time,
and the page loads nearly instantly in most cases.
If you notice that it even loads, then it's too slow.
Then it's too slow. Yep.
Yep. Okay, so here's where we get into the good part of this, and this is where Bill and I spoke earlier, and he's going to walk us through, to the best of his ability, the Citrix evolution of trying to take the original concept of presentation, screen scrapes of Win32 apps, including the desktop somewhere along the way, and they tried to add in some aggregation of these apps and other services, and Bill's going to try to go through these. I don't know if we'll get all the names correct, but it'll be a good history lesson for some of the Citrix folks out there, especially some of the newer ones.
Yes, absolutely. So when you look at the evolution of Citrix, of course, for those of us who've been around a while, I've been working with it since '98. But, Citrix as a company started in the late 80s, 89 to be specific. And, in the early days, I won't go over the, multi-win and WinView and some of those really, really early products because I wasn't really around. I don't have any familiarity with them other than what I've read. But really my experience started with the concept of delivering apps to users and to some degree desktops. But really the initial focus, I think, was applications. And this was the WinFrame, MetaFrame days back in the mid-90s, 94, 95. And this was the idea that, that you have a PC, and there was this statement made by someone back in that time frame or prior to the mid-90s that we wanted to try to have a PC on every desk in every business because that way we had the desktop available. The problem was that with that it was a great theory, but the reality was we have these applications that need to be updated, these applications that need to be delivered to users. In order to deliver them in those old days, you had to install them locally, and the tools just didn't exist for you to do that on a broad scale. So in comes WinFrame and MetaFrame over the course of the mid-90s to help deliver those applications to those devices in a centralized manner. Some people argued it was a throwback to the mainframe days. It's probably an oversimplification, but conceptually it's similar. So the problem was back in those days, you had to have an app on the endpoint to access those applications in WinFrame or MetaFrame, and that app was called the Program Neighborhood app. Perhaps it was called something prior to that, but it wasn't called the receiver. It was basically called the Citrix Client or the Program Neighborhood app, and you launched it and you pointed it to your data collector or your ICA listener. And there were some other names for it back in those days. And you saw all the apps that were published by your organization. You could launch them.
So XML broker.
Yeah. They called it something different then, but basically the same concept. Then in the early 2000s, Citrix bought a company called Sequoia. It was focused on portal technology, and out of that came the Enfuse product, which morphed into web interface, which then became Storefront, and then the Workspace with Intelligence ultimately. But back in those days, in 2001, 2002, the Enfuse, those were the Enfuse days. The user could access all of their applications. You could even publish web links and content because the internet was starting to gain some hold back then. And then came MetaFrame XP and later Presentation Server, which were evolutions, of course, additional functionality, more density, support for newer Microsoft operating systems. And then in 2004, they looked back. Citrix looked back to the Sequoia acquisition and determined they could do some other stuff with that technology, and they developed a product called MetaFrame Secure Access Manager. I'm sure some of the folks on this call might remember MSAM. It had a relatively short life, but it was essentially a portal that aggregated apps and desktops content. It was a VPN-free, in quotes, a solution that wasn't really VPN free, but it tunneled through an access gateway or secure gateway back in those days. And they had these things called content delivery agents, or CDAs, that you could point to external content sources and get information pulled into the portal. So this was designed, where Citrix was going with this. They were really, frankly, a bit ahead of their time. Was to create an aggregation of all of this data into one location. Where the users could access to certain content. They could get access to their virtual apps and virtual desktops, as well as external content via these CDAs. And around the same time, we had these application service providers, folks that were using Citrix and other technologies to host customer apps centrally. So kind of almost like the early days of software as a service, but really, it was, some folks called it that, but it was really more hosting. And that still exists today in hosting and managed service providers. But those markets were both MSAM from Citrix and the ASP concept were kind of ahead of their time because, again, we're talking about mid-2000s, 2004, 2005. The internet was still kind of young, and they just didn't take off as well. So Citrix basically at that point shifted to the newer architectures of application delivery, stuck with web interface for a while. And then, of course, Storefront came along with the rename to XenApp. And then we have the evolution to the workspace that we have today.
So, Bill, you went through that entire story and you did not say Dazzle.
I didn't say Dazzle. Gosh, I didn't have Dazzle written down. I forgot all about that. Dazzle was the predecessor. Thank you, Andy. Was the predecessor to Storefront. Yeah, Citrix called it Dazzle. I actually had a customer, as a hospital customer, or healthcare, that's what they called it. They called the portal. When we pitched it to them when we went in and pitched it to them, we said this is called Dazzle. It's a kind of an early name. And so that's what it became. And I actually think that the last time I was in there, which was within the past few months, they actually still referred to it as the Dazzle portal. So it obviously that name evolved into the Storefront name, and the technology kind of became part of the Storefront solution. But I left the Dazzle out of my my discussion there.
Well, it was just a name for Storefront, right? It pretty
That's
much
what it was.
Storefront.
Yeah. But as you can see, this, everything was built on the past. Everything was built on what they had developed initially, which is the natural evolution of these kinds of things. But I think some of the stuff that with MSAM and Dazzle and the ASP concept, they are where we are today because of what was done in the past. But I think they failed to some extent in the past simply because they were ahead of their time. The market wasn't ready for them. And I know of the technology application delivery space is littered with the names of companies that jumped at the ASP market thinking this was going to be the next big thing. And it didn't happen simply because we didn't have the bandwidth or the ubiquitous bandwidth that we have today that would enable that kind of connectivity. I mean, we were talking about back in those days, it was 56K modems, right, Andy?
If you were lucky, it might have been a 56K modem that connected at 15K.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, I remember I worked for, like I said, I worked for a software company. I was right around a little bit before the 2000s, and they had a T1, and I thought, well, my goodness, you talk about fast.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember. Anyway, the first time I got high speed wireless connectivity, not Wi-Fi, but wireless connectivity, and a page loaded in about 10 seconds, I thought we had arrived. I thought that was it.
Absolutely.
Hey,
But the point of all that is just to kind of illustrate how we got to where we are, and that there were some missteps along the way, but I think those missteps have helped frame where we are now and taken a more methodical approach and a more careful approach to delivering the ultimate workspace with intelligence in a manner that allows it to respond as fast as possible, to reduce the context switching that I talked about earlier, and quite frankly, to provide the most rich employee experience or end user experience that we can. Because at the end of the day, like you and I, Andy, we deal with this all the time. We could build the best environment we think from an engineering perspective, but if the user hates it, we probably have failed.
right. Yeah, you got to, especially today's user that needs
Yes.
that needs that loving touch. The newer end user that we're trying to cater to and make sure that we're helping them get their job done. To go back to your conversation there, I think the biggest driver for all this is the network speeds that we now have, and the no doubts, no return of the SaaS, true SaaS based, browser based app that really pulls from HTML based world, app that pulls HTTP, right, content, not HTML, right, but HTTP content. The true, we're finally here in terms of SaaS applications, and Citrix is betting that the future of the workspace is bringing those Win32 apps forward in a place where SaaS apps are treated just as equally.
Absolutely, and with the requisite security and control that IT and the business needs for those applications, since many of those are now critical systems of record for businesses, the SaaS applications, I mean, and being able to secure those and control who has access when and from where is as critical, if not more now, than it was in the past.
No, absolutely. That SaaS app becoming the primary default way of delivering an application for most companies, which I think we're there.
We are, yeah. I mean, think about us. Everything we do is in Salesforce. That's a SaaS app, right?
Well, it's in Salesforce, it's in Slack, it's in Teams, it's in Podio, right, it's in OneDrive or Microsoft Office, online. Right. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Well, I mean, let's talk about it now. I mean, let's jump into the blog from Kevin, and that's truly finding a way to integrate these apps through this workspace concept, which includes, we'll start old school, right? The Win32 apps, getting those Microsoft Win32 apps into a place where they're accessible and can provide additional content. The files, right? We never really had to think about files because those were either on your PC or on the network share somewhere. Now they come from lots of places, and we need to be able to get them from lots of places and be authenticated to lots of places without having to sign in 15 different times. And that information needs to be searchable and discoverable fairly quickly and easily.
It does. And it, as you'll talk about in a minute, it goes, obviously goes beyond that to incorporate SaaS apps and authentication mechanisms and all that. So carry on.
Yeah. And so you bring in that, the one we've talked about several times here lately, and that's SaaS apps. I mean, those SaaS apps they're all over the place. They're literally all over the world. They will never be in your data center, never should be in your data center, but yet they got to look and feel like they're coming from one homogeneous, centralized place where users can get access. My biggest pet peeve of our own IT technology is that I have to log into multiple things every day.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got 15 passwords I got to keep up with. Workspace is going to and does allow us to integrate with a single user identity, whether it's coming from Azure AD or your own AD or Okta or some of the other pieces all tied together through some type of SAML solution. This has to be done. If not, we're going to drive our end users crazy. We onboard new employees at XenTegra, and I start explaining to them how to get into stuff. I'm like, oh wow, I'm embarrassed.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it try to look at it somewhat through the lens of my 12-year-old. who's got an iPhone, and he can get to everything he needs to just by clicking an icon on there. He doesn't have to worry about authenticating separately most of the time. Most of the time it's saved for him. And the users that are coming into the workforce, we've been talking about this for years, but the ones that are coming into the workforce now are the days of sitting down and having to have applications installed on a PC. That's long gone. They're going to want to be productive from day one or day two at the latest. And give them a workspace where they can authenticate with one identity and access everything they need. That's going to go a long way towards, again, that employee experience.
Well, it's funny you say that, because you say it's long gone, but I know you don't mean that. It's in theory it should be long gone, but the reality is it's still right here in front of us and hadn't evolved that much since 1995. We still log into that workspace, but now the workspace is desktop, and we at some point have to have a better desktop, and that's what we're talking about here.
That's what we're talking about. Well, we're still going to have an endpoint, a physical device of some sort, but what you see from that device is going to change, and it's going to be better.
Yeah. Somebody posted via Docker an iGel endpoint.
I saw that
where they were using Windows apps via container solutions, and the funny thing about it is Microsoft would have got on stage and yelled that was dumb and don't do that. Now they embrace it because they know the future of this is consumption of things, including Microsoft related things, and there's no stopping it. It's going to be a ubiquitous world.
Yes.
Okay, so one that we haven't brought up here, and I'm looking at the blog here, and that's mobile apps. And I personally, I'm still not sure how mobile apps fit into the workspace. Maybe you can explain it to me, but I do think there's an element of mobile apps that get used in all this. I just don't know how they actually show up in the workspace concept.
Yeah, I think ultimately, this is about incorporating endpoint management capabilities within the workspace, so that when an end user launches the workspace with intelligence from a mobile device, perhaps they'll see the mobile versions of the apps, or they'll be able to install the mobile versions of the apps directly from their device. Or perhaps at some point, I know there's been a lot of talk about refactoring, although I don't know that that's going to be the solution. I think really what the solution is going to be is, relative to mobile apps, is encouraging or suggesting, kind of through that AI, hey, if you need to access Workday or you need to access Concur on your iPhone, you're going to get a better experience if you install the app. And once you install the app, we can bring it into a managed scenario in some way using endpoint management to help with the updates and those sorts of things. But I know that launching certain applications on a mobile device without having the actual application installed, the experience is much different. So by enabling the end user to go get that app if they don't already have it, or push it to them, then that's going to help the experience particularly for SaaS-based apps that have that kind of functionality.
Yeah, we've gone this far into the podcast here, and we haven't really talked about this. So, one way to access the workspace is through a browser, right? Any browser you want, right. HTML5 capable browser is going to work. At the same time, you can install an app, whether it's a Win32 app, whether it's the Workspace app for Mac or Android or iOS. I mean, we talked a while ago. You talked about solving the need to get to a bunch of apps by installing an app, Program Neighborhood. That hasn't changed. Citrix knows that in order to do this going forward, it's going to have to be browser based, and at the same time, it's going to have to be app based. And both places take you to something that looks and feels the same.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, just a quick time check here. We got about 15 more minutes, and I don't want to run too long with this. And unfortunately for me and you probably too, we got another meeting I got to jump on. But I think this is great, and I hope people are enjoying this and getting some perspective of at least our thoughts on the workspace. So yes. Next topic that Kevin has here is taking this concept of aggregating all this stuff and then adding intelligence. And we've talked about that a bunch here. Citrix acquired, I guess it's 2 years ago now. You keep me straight on that, but they
something like that. Yeah.
What Sapo, SAPHO, and what Sapo did or does, it takes the micro app services and ties it into the services, the APIs that are available from SaaS offerings, whether they're internet-based, public-facing, or whether they're internal, if your apps have that. If your apps don't have that, then somebody like XenTegra is going to need to come in and help you design the internal service that can be tied in through micro apps and extended. But the main idea here is that these apps that are on this workspace now have some way of going and getting data and bringing it to you and telling you what you need to do next and making sure you're not missing an expense report that needs to go in or needs to be approved, or a PTO request by someone, or maybe it's maybe it's something as simple as an email or some type of Slack message that needs to be responded to. But that's where the Sapo thing ties in. Do you want to add a little more color to that?
Yeah, I think that you hit most of it right there on the head there. But I think Sapo is about again, the micro apps tying into the back end. And this kind of goes back again to what I was talking about in terms of context switching, by enabling the micro apps within the workspace with intelligence, by adding that intelligence element via the micro apps, which is part of it. We're able to hit those simple, quick things like expense reports or PTO requests or other requests that might come through the application. So I know, when one of members of my team request PTO, I typically get an email telling me that they've requested PTO. Well, with the intelligent workspace, I could get just a feed, kind of like a Twitter feed almost, that says, hey, so-and-so has requested PTO, and I could click on that. Yes, am I context switching? Yes, but I didn't have to go out and open the application that they had entered that into, go into the appropriate place in that application, find their entry, and then approve it. I can approve it right there on the screen that I'm working on and immediately switch back to what I was doing. So we're talking a process that might take 30 seconds or 45 seconds and several layers to get there. I could do that in less than 5 seconds.
And that's good. And what if it did? What if it couldn't take you exactly to what you need to approve? It could at least take you to close enough, right? It gets you into SAP, gets you into Concur, but it doesn't have to take you all the way. All the way is the ideal. That's the nirvana. But just being in one place to start that allows you to go from there without having to re-authenticate, get to what you need, get that taken care of, or better yet, take you all the way to the finish line and allow you to approve it and move on. But that's where the intelligence is going to have to be managed, and someone's going to have to decide what to allow to notify you and interact with you versus just getting you to what's trying to let you know something's going on.
Yeah, well, I don't have any personal knowledge of futures, but it would seem to me that the natural evolution of something like this would be initially present the user with these micro app notifications, this feed that says, okay, you got this PTO to address, or this one to address, or what have you. And over time, of course, initially the user can elect, which ones they want to receive, which ones they don't. But I think over time, what we'll probably see, and again, I have no inside knowledge of this, is it will probably start deciding based on your behavior, at least to some extent. If you're ignoring the same basic notification, every day, multiple times a day, then that's probably one that we need to reduce showing you, unless you opt out of that feature. So I think, ultimately we'll see some level of intelligence in the workspace beyond what's going to be in there initially that will conform to our behavior.
I think part of the key there is that the user's still going to have to do something, right? They're still going to have to indicate, yes, this is content I like. Yes, I want to keep getting more of this. No, I don't want this one. I don't want this one as much. I mean, the idea that it's going to just totally learn our behavior without us behaving the way we mean to behave that's quite a mouthful, but I think that's inevitable. That has to happen. Yeah. Regarding the micro app service, right? So Citrix is going to have some things that'll plug in right away, and you can just from a GUI, you're going to be able to, as the admin, go and configure what can be active and what can. And then there's going to be development needs either from the micro app service perspective or from the back end, right? The system of record. It's going to have to be evolved. If it has REST APIs, then great. If it doesn't, then someone's going to have to write it. But it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge bet by Citrix that this is what's coming. But at the same time, it's a huge opportunity to get smart about the way we work. And like we said a while ago, the future workers of America or the world, they're going to want a little bit of this because they're going to get it everywhere else they interact.
That's right. Yeah, and like you said, Andy, there are certain systems of record that for which there are apps already built. So it'll be a pretty simple onboarding for those that have those. Some of those, like the major ones, Salesforce, Workday. There's a whole bunch of them. You can see some of them in Kevin's blog. But obviously, to conform these, if you have custom developed apps, you have your own DevOps team, DevOps culture, then Citrix will have a whole framework for building these apps, either by writing code or by using an app builder or something along those lines. Will enable the end user or the customer to integrate their custom apps with the micro apps architecture in the workspace.
So we have two more topics to hit. One is one that we struggle with as XenTegra all the time, and that is more and more SaaS services showing up every day. We get one service with the idea that's the one that's going to end all the other ones, but the truth is it just adds to the stack. And what Citrix is really doing here is they're not trying to replace Teams, they're not trying to replace Slack, they're not trying to replace SAP. They're giving you a place where you can go and get to those things efficiently. And that's the real message here, is that Citrix isn't trying to be the one end-all, be-all workspace like some of the other players are. It's trying to be the one that's kind of like, I'm going to use this example, like Switzerland, like kind of gets along with everybody. Let's get along with everybody, and let's just help everybody we can by using technology to do so. Yes, and in the process, help the customer and the experience for the end user, absolutely. Yeah. So the next section here, which is really important, probably maybe the most important part, and that's the upside of this from an IT perspective. Because we have that single place where everything is being accessed from and coming through, we now can look at analytics of that data, right? It's still ones and zeros. We can look at that and we can do two things with it at least. One of those is performance, right? We never really knew how that user experience looked when they were accessing Salesforce or any other SaaS app, especially those internal, homegrown apps that were, never intended to have analytics. We can now do that because at the network doesn't lie, right? I mean, I've been working in IT support for 20 plus years now. And at the end of the day, when you couldn't figure something out, you went and did a Wireshark trace. And right. You figured out what was really happening because you could kind of insert yourself in the conversation and see what was going on back and forth. So, from a performance perspective, you're going to get that. And then maybe most importantly these days is security, right? Having, I ride the subway in New York a lot, and they've got these signs all over the place that, they talk about the security guard, they talk about metal detectors, talk about that kind of stuff. But the reality is me sitting there looking at all the other people is probably the best security you can have. And that's what really the security analytics that having the single access point is going to bring to the equation. Yeah, but it's all about visibility. And the more granular, the better. But aggregating that in a way and presenting it in a way that makes it easy to consume. We could do a Wireshark trace, but the Wireshark trace would tell us a lot, but it was also pretty cryptic and difficult to understand and difficult to correlate using some of the analytics that are built behind the workspace with intelligence and some of the other software that Citrix has put in the cloud. We have that kind of visibility, but if we want to get into the ones and zeros, like you said, Andy, we can, but more often than not, we just want to see what's broken and what might be functioning poorly. And if we can look at charts and graphs and see that, it can narrow our focus and help us get to the end result quicker. But I'm glad you said the word cloud, because that reminds me to kind of tell people this is all based on technology Citrix has been putting together for all these years around NetScaler and NetFlow and everything back to MetaFrame and WinFrame. But the reality of the workspace is that we have to pipe this thing through Citrix in a cloud so that we can get the insights. Now, I think there's on-prem pieces that can feed up to the cloud, but the whole point is this is that cloud, this hybrid world, on-prem and cloud coming together to provide a solution that makes sense for everyone to be able to see this kind of come to fruition for everything. Yeah, and it's a natural extension of, like we said before, of the apps and desktop worlds that Citrix lives in, but it can operate independent of that. And what I mean is, to be clear, this concept, this workspace with intelligence, while it definitely can consume and apply to those customers that are working with the legacy product set, Xen Apps and Desktops, CVAD, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, Service, and so forth. It can also work and provide the benefits that we've talked about for customers that perhaps don't have that. So they can still get the aggregation of SaaS apps. They can get the analytics relative to those SaaS apps. They can get files. They can get the micro apps architecture. All of those things are available to customers who may have not bought into the virtual apps and desktop story. So this is a solution that
goes beyond perhaps, I don't know, Andy, if you want to comment on this or not, but goes beyond what Citrix has traditionally been focused on.
Well, it actually says this. I mean, apps used to be one thing. They used to be Win32. Now there are lots of things,
Right.
including SaaS apps. So Citrix is, it's all about the app. And if you're a Citrix guy, you've been able to say that for a couple of decades now. The difference is the app became something else while we were doing that. And now this is the evolution of being all about the app.
Right.
Yeah. All right, Bill. Well, let's wrap it up with that. I think that was an awesome take on this blog. And again, if you want to check it out, you can look at the blogs on the Citrix website. This, again, was written by Kevin Binder. Citrix Workspace. Tune in for a great workspace experience. I'm sure Google will help you find that if you want to find the actual blog. But, Bill, thanks for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Good stuff. Talk to you next week.
All right, thank you. Bye.
All right.